do you prefer to go by? Mrs. Ledbetter, Lilly, what do you prefer to go by?
Ledbetter.
Lilly? Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We are a student organization called Politically Active. I am a faculty co-sponsor of it. My name is Andrew. I am joined by Hunter Clouse, who is president. Maybe you see him waving. It's kind of dark through your view. But there he is. Hunter Clouse, this is me, and this is Sophie. Sophie, you want to wave as well? And then we're joined by a full room of folks wanting to say hi, and we will talk to you for a while, but then later on we'll open up the floor for other people to speak with you as well. Does that sound okay to you, ma'am? All right.
Sounds good.
Let's go ahead with our first question.
All right, Lilly, your name has become synonymous with the political activism nowadays, and I wanted to know kind of if you had been politically active before all this happened in your life, like not including voting, I guess.
I voted. I was really politically involved on the QT side because all of my previous employers, they did not want me to make it public where I stood, whether I was Republican, Democrat, Independent, or whatever, or how I was voting. So it was not to my advantage to let people know where I stood. You know, and I really regret that now because I could have made such a difference for so many years and been so well educated. I've had to get my education in political arena actually since all this came up.
Okay, and thank you. I got a quick question for you. Once again, just in case anybody in this room might not recognize your southern drawl, you are an Alabama lady, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, now first of all, as far as I understand it from the facts of your situation, you were paid unfairly by your company without even knowing it for years. Explain how you discovered that discrepancy and what was your reaction? Did you immediately know that you were going to sue? What exactly did you, was your plan of action?
Okay, this may be a long answer in a roundabout way because I think the people need to know that, excuse me, that this was not the first job I ever had. I was in the late 30s when I went to work for Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, and I worked there for 19 years before I learned I was paid 40% less than the white men doing the exact same job. And how I found out, someone left me a note. It had my name and 3 men. It had our base salary. People said, well, how did I know that was correct? It was because mine was to the dollar, and it was an odd amount. But when I went to work for that company, they told me in HR, never discuss your pay or you won't have a job. So no one ever discussed their pay. Their raises were given sporadically, like one guy may get one in December, somebody else may get one in July. All of us, the 16 of us working in one area, we didn't know. They just didn't give everybody their raises at one time. We did not know, do we all get 5%, 2%, none, or whatever. No, none of that was ever known. It was never posted either.
Okay,
So,
and
not knowing if my pay was staying in line with the men and the other women.
so what was your reaction? You find out, you're like, I'm going to sue, or were there other things you were thinking? What was your immediate reaction?
Okay, I had already made appointments with my superior because I was 2 years away from retirement, trying to find out exactly where I stood so that I could make sure that my pay was in line and I would be having my retirement exactly where it should be because it was based on what I was earning. But I couldn't get any answers. My superior ignored me. In fact, he told me I was listening to too much BS when I told him I felt like the men were making a lot more than I was doing the same job. And he said I was just listening to too much BS. I went to HR. I got no reply there. In fact, the lady that started looking into it for me, they transferred her out within 2 weeks. So that sort of told me to leave it alone. So I left it alone, but when I got that note, I knew not to stop at HR, not to stop at my boss's office because he was not going to say anything. He'd tell me again that I was listening to too much BS. So I put it in my pocket, but I was humiliated. I was really, really embarrassed because, you know, here I am, have just entered the plant to do a 12-hour shift. I have no idea who gave me this. I do not know where the information came from. I do not know how many people know about it and the extent of it. And two, how can a major corporation treat people this way? So I thought about it, and then it occurred to me, my retirement, my 401k, and my Social Security, everything will be based on what I had earned. I just could not let it go. So I made my 12 hours. I got home the next morning. I told my husband what I had learned. I said, I can't let it go. This is breaking the law. I said, I have to be charged with equal employment. So he said, what time do you want to leave? And that was right after I told him if I start, we will be in this for probably 8 years because there's not quick solutions. These cases drag on for years and years. So that's what I did. I went straight to Birmingham, Alabama, didn't have an appointment, walked in, got in line, waited, and filed a charge.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
When you did decide to sue, to what extent were you thinking that you were making a stand for all women everywhere? Or was it kind of...
Initially, I was making a stand for me and my family.
Yeah.
Because I thought about all the hard times trying to make ends meet with a son and daughter in college, my husband losing a job and then having to take a part-time job. You know, you have scouts, and you have sports, and you have classes, and you have all these expenses, and then the children get to teenage years, and then they've got to have some transportation. Then they get sick, and they've got to have dental work. There are so many expenses, and the mortgage is due. So it was out of necessity that I was working, and I never turned down any overtime. And that was another thing that really blew my mind when I got that note. The management in production was paid overtime, because if we didn't get overtime and we were required to work a lot, the men on the jobs and women would make more money than we did, because it was nothing for us to work 12-hour shifts 7 nights a week. So the overtime was a tremendous loss for me. And then that also would have affected my retirement. But after I filed the charge, in about 9 months, the equal employment called, and they said, you've got one of the best cases we've ever seen, but you probably would get to trial or get to court faster if you had your own attorney, because we're backlogged in short appeal. So at that particular time, the President of the United States was trying to do away with equal employment. So they were way understaffed. So I found an attorney in Birmingham, Alabama, John Goldfarb, and his firm took my case on a contingent basis, which meant whatever I got, they would get 50%. But people like myself in middle class America, I did not have enough income, no savings to afford a good attorney that could handle a case for 8 years. It actually took 9. From the time I filed the charge in 1998, we did not get to federal trial until 2003. We did not get the verdict until from the Supreme Court until 2007. So it actually took me 9 years, and then it took us 18 months to get the Ledbetter bill passed. But when that verdict came out in May, it was no longer about me and my family. It was about all of you, because people from coast to coast, north to south, was being underpaid for their work. And the senior people are primarily people like myself. We're widows. Now, I have outlived my husband 11 years. Most women outlive their husbands 10 years, and their income drops drastically. In some cases, women no longer have any income. It's all gone. And it's not because they didn't work. They may have worked 30 years as a nurse or a teacher or a secretary or a housekeeper, whatever, but they didn't get the wages, therefore the retirement they should be entitled to. This country, it has an epidemic, and it is drastic, and it's also hurting education.
I have another quick question, Lily. What was it like to see your case go up into the Supreme Court and be at the center of national attention for equal pay?
It was awesome, I can tell you that, it really was. It was just awesome. And I'll tell you now, you know what's really terrible, life goes on. All during the years that we were working on the Ledbetter case and trying to get to court, and trying to win, and trying to get me some income that I could finish out my life on, life goes on. There was birthdays and graduations and ball games. Then my husband gets cancer. He ended up the last 2 years of his life, he had 4. And we were doing cancer treatment, doing surgeries in Birmingham, which is 150 miles around the trip. And then he did 34 radiation and chemo, and that's extremely expensive and extremely hard. And I was traveling back and forth to Washington, walking the halls of Congress and walking the Supreme Court, trying to get everything changed. But he supported me because he said, you know, we've got to see it through and it will happen. But going to Washington for the Supreme Court, my husband had just had the left side of his face removed and skin grafted on 2 weeks prior. I left him at home with home health care nurse and family members. My daughter and I traveled to D.C. We sat in the Supreme Court. I watched the justices while my case was presented. But it started out, Ledbetter v. Goodyear, and that's the last time I heard my name. The rest of the time it was she and women. And if we let this case go forward, while women will come out of the woodwork filing charges, they never have. And they won't, because not many people want to devote 9 years of their life arguing back and forth, and people downing them and telling them how bad they are and they're poor workers. Goodyear said I was a very poor worker, but that's not true. I worked there for 19 years and 10 months. I left on my own. I was given the top performance award in 1991, and then when they started the light truck radio division, they handpicked 4 managers, and I was one of those 4. And it was based on my management technique and philosophy, and that was quite an honor. So I did the good work, I did a good job, but I only got shortchanged because I was a woman. But when that verdict came out in May of '07, the lawyers called and told me. They said, you don't have to worry about the media, we'll handle them. NBC called, I said, I live at 1206, come on up. CNN called, I said, I live at 1206, come on up. They'll send a crew in here from Washington and California to make video after video after video that ran on YouTube, may still be out there. So every time they called, I said, come on up. I didn't have anything to be embarrassed. I had a case. My case should have went through the Supreme Court like greased lightning, because all of the rulings in cases like mine, and it had been proved in the lower federal court beyond a shadow of a doubt how much money I had lost. That's why the jury gave me $3.8 million. Of course, before I ever left the courtroom, the judge had already reduced my $3 million to $300,000, and I only got $30,000 per year. You know, when you file for equal pay, you can only go back 2 years.
Real quick, thank you again so much, Lily, for sharing with us. I can see a little bit better now that we've got you moved in. I was just going to ask you to readjust your camera. Go ahead.
Oh, do I need to move?
No, you're okay now. We were only getting like.
Okay.
Now you're great.
Get up here.
I was only getting a quarter of your face a moment ago. Now I got the whole thing.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I was just hiding the wrinkles.
Okay.
So this ended up being a national discussion over how women can respond to pay inequality. I know you're talking about how they were saying women would come out of the woodwork. What was it like being around all that national attention about women coming out and speaking out for pay inequality?
Well, it was sort of like working at Goodyear to go into a management supervisory job, and that's what I did. When I went to Goodyear, you've got to have a very, very thick skin. Your skin's got to be thick. Nothing people say I never take it personally. I just let it roll off my back, so to speak. Because if they say something, I listen, because it might be something that I really need to know. I might do something with it, I may not. But it never bothered me, actually. And when I filed the charge, and all my neighbors and my church people knew, a lot of them, you know, they'd yank me by the arm and want to know why I was on that Democrat side, and why was I doing this, and why was I doing that, and why did I go over there and take a man's job? This is not a man's job. It was a job. It had a description. I fit that description. I had the experience, I had the education, and I happened to be good at it. So that was my job. That was not a man's job. In the past, yes, most of those jobs had been filled by men.
Lilly, I want to take a few minutes to talk about the Supreme Court case, because I'm a bit of a Supreme Court nerd, and your case was really, really interesting. For those in the room who don't know, the Supreme Court case was Ledbetter versus Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. And ma'am, Justice Alito later wrote the opinion. In the oral argument, he argued over and over again against your particular side. His primary argument was that the initial pay discrepancy happened a while ago, but since then the job hadn't been discriminatory in its adjustments on your pay. Therefore, your only shot to have sued was back when the discrepancy occurred. What was your reaction to that, listening to that argument?
He was wrong, and Justice Ginsburg said so. The problem and the fact of the matter, in my case, that had been the law all in years past. And you know, when Congress makes a law and it passes and becomes signed by the President of the United States and becomes on the record, it's not always clear. It's not exactly black or white. It has a little cloudy in there that's based on interpretation, but it's always based on common sense interpretation. And the bill and the law that my case was based on had always been, if you were still getting a check and you found out you were being discriminated against for whatever reason, you had 180 days to file a charge. And that's what I did. Now, there's no reason for anybody to wait like some of this. In fact, I think it was Chief Justice Roberts who said during my hearing that while women would save it up like a big savings account, well, that's not the case, because you can only go back 2 years. If you prove in the Supreme Court you've been discriminated against, like I did, you can only go back 2 years. Well, the judge in the lower federal court only gave me $30,000 per year. There's no upbeat in the retirement. There was no going back and say, well, let's recalculate the overtime. No, it was just $30,000 based on the lowest paid male that worked where I worked. Wow. So actually, the interpretation that Alito made, they figured out a way to get it through, made it acceptable, but that was not the case. I was still getting a check. I was still working when I found out, and I should have been able to have gotten the award. But in all the cases passed, the Bazemore case was before mine. It went like that. And I can tell you, the big group of lawyers that represented me from Birmingham, Alabama, they have $500,000 billable hours and money spent in my case. They never got a dime, but they stayed with me all the way through the Supreme Court, because they, like myself, we thought it would go through. We couldn't understand why it did not.
Can I just ask a quick question about what it's like to even listen to an oral argument? Because, you know, at one point I'm listening to Justice Souter, and he's arguing that they were trying to draw a line between, and I'm quoting, present purposeful discrimination and present knowledge of past discrimination which is knowingly carried forward. Are there times you're listening to this and your head's spinning, you don't feel like you fully understand what they're saying, even though you know they're talking about you?
True. You're absolutely right. Because you just wanted, and then here's Justice Thomas up there laying back in his chair asleep, or with his eyes shut. You just want to shake them and say, look, you are here to address the law. And when I testified before Ted Kennedy's committee in the Senate, he had charts, 2 of them on Leto and 2 on Roberts. And then one was what they said in confirmation hearings, like Robert said, he would call balls and strikes, and I will adhere to the way the bill had been interpreted in the past. Well, he didn't. And the Ledbetter case is not the only one. In fact, the fireman from New York, he ruled against them. And there's many, many cases that he should not have ruled against, and he has. Because when he did, he changed the law. And he was a big influence because he had just gone on the beach. He was the Chief Justice, and Alito had just gone on, and he was the same way. What he said in confirmation and how he's ruled doesn't appear to be the same individual. Justice Ginsburg now, she said they don't understand what it's like, and people don't stand around water coolers discussing their pay. And if I had, I wouldn't have had a job in those years I did. So I tried to find out.
Yeah, that was a part of her dissent, actually. She made that exact argument.
Right.
For the record, just for the record, for anybody here who wasn't around, or at least wasn't paying attention to your case, only 1 female justice. 8 of the 9 were men, just FYI. Anyways.
That's true, and I have believed all along that had Sandra Day O'Connor still been there, I probably would have left with my award, because she was a big influence with Kennedy, Justice Kennedy. And after Roberts and Leto came on and Sandra Day O'Connor left, Kennedy went with them. He didn't more or less go with Ginsburg and Stevens and the other 2. And that was a big influence. So I think I would have gotten the award. And it wasn't a lot of money, because you remember now time I got to the Supreme Court, I only had $360,000 award, and I understood that some of that would be adjusted out. And also I had to pay federal and Alabama taxes on most of it because it was in lieu of wages. And then my attorney firm would have gotten 50%. So if my math is right, I would have probably had less than $50,000.
Moving on, Lily, what was it like to hear that the Supreme Court ruled the 5-4? Was it really heartbreaking, and did it feel like the road had just collapsed underneath you, or how did that make you feel?
Well, you know, to get your case heard, you have to have a 5-4 acceptance too. And that's what I had going in. But I had really, really hoped, and I really prayed and believed that hopefully Kennedy would use his common sense and go with those 4 once we got there and once he heard the case. But he did not. And I think the pressure was on from maybe the White House, because you had Republicans and you had Roe and Cheney, and the pressure was on because I looked over, you know, you can tell a lot. When I looked over at the firm that came from Birmingham to represent Goodyear, they sent 1 attorney because the government's attorney had gone through the 11th Circuit with my attorneys arguing for my case. When we went to the 11th Circuit in Atlanta, Georgia, the EEOC sent a lawyer, and they were there arguing about my case. They supported it from day 1. But when we got to Washington, the United States attorney went on Goodyear's side. He was one of them that said, we can't let this case go forward. But that, I can assure you, this has nothing, you can talk to women, if you know some, maybe your mother or grandmother, and ask them, would they have spent 9 years fighting for what's right? Very, very few people will do that. And for me, from day 1, I knew basically when I told my husband how long we'd be in this, I would never get a dime. But I had to do it because it was the right thing. And I'm the type individual, I just can't let it go if it's against the law. I believe in what's right, and if it's right, and there's nothing you can do to change it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for going through with that and following through. And even while it didn't work out in the Supreme Court, you were involved, the Fair Pay Act happened 2 years later. So were you involved with the creation of the Fair Pay Act, or did someone reach out to you and say, we're working on this, can we put your name on it?
Within 2 weeks of the verdict, Washington had called. In fact, it was Congressman George Miller from California. He was the chairperson of the Education and Labor Committee at the time. He said, Mrs. Ledbetter, we're working on an equal pay bill, and we would like to name it after you. And I just froze. First of all, I couldn't believe I was talking to a real live congressman. And second, I couldn't believe they were going to honor me that way. And I said, absolutely. So within 2 weeks, I was back in Washington. My attorney called. He said, we're going to Washington.
Wow.
I did a, and he said, don't worry, I have your plane ticket. Because I have no idea. We've been doing cancer treatments and all of everything that goes with that. And gas was almost $5 a gallon during those years. You have to remember, I go way back now because this all started in '98. So we went to Washington and I did a huge press conference. I had no idea what I was going to be up against when I got there. And then I went in and testified the first time in the House before Congressman Miller's committee. And I testified 2 different times in the House, twice in the Senate. And those are not easy tasks either because the United States Chamber of Commerce sends in an attorney to argue against you. So the first 2 times I had a lawyer named Mullen, but the second time he looked at me and he was so red-faced and his blood pressure was up. He said, I'll never go up against you again. No, he didn't come back. And so it was really a journey. But and I also got to testify on behalf of Elena Kagan's confirmation, and I didn't take that lightly. I investigated her. I called people in Harvard that I knew and asked them about her. I researched her work, looked her up, and knew who she was and what she stood for, and I was the first ordinary citizen to testify for her.
Lilly, you are one of the few people in America that has a Supreme Court case with your name on it and a federal law with your name on it. While your case was coming up in the court system, and while Congress was chewing on a law with your name on it, was public reaction to you personally different or the same? Was it largely positive in your personal life, largely negative in your personal life? How is it affecting you?
It was positive. It really was positive. I'd say everywhere except my home community and state, but in church. But it was really positive everywhere else in this country. In fact, when the bill was signed in January of 2009, the first invitation I had was to Rome, Italy. They paid for me and one attorney to come to Italy and talk for 6 days about my journey and my case. And as you know, I speak this southern drawl. I don't understand Italian. I don't speak Italian. And they didn't understand what I speak. They would get so excited, and I would get so excited because they had the same situation. And so I was supposed to have 2 days sightseeing, but it worked out that I was so well received, they needed me on another day, so I only ended up with 1 day. But that was good because I was there to make a difference. I have been out of the country 3 times because of this. I've been to Barbados, and I've been to Canada, and I've been to Italy. But I have been all over these great United States talking about equal pay for equal work because you guys get it. You want your wives to make good money. You want any woman you know to be making good money because if you're selling cars, you're selling groceries, or whatever you're doing in life, it takes money. And that money comes back and it's a vicious circle. And it educates our children better, and this country will be smarter and better for the future.
Right. That's awesome, Lilly. I also heard that you got to meet President Obama in 2009. What was that experience like?
That was an awesome experience too because, he and Clinton was running against each other, and I wanted to endorse Clinton, and they told me in Washington, they said, no, you got to stay neutral, because I was walking the halls of Congress. And here's something that's outstanding about this. That bill was sponsored and co-sponsored by Republicans, Democrats, both. And it was voted into law by both parties. I am so proud of that. But they wanted me to stay neutral, because I would go to Washington for about 3 days every 2 weeks and walk the halls of Congress. We'd have meetings with the people that trying to get support for the vote. And so I wanted to support her, so I had to tell her, no, I can't. But anyway, they were running, so the first time it was voted on in the Senate. They waited until 6 p.m. that night. I was on the floor listening to the arguments, but Senator Clinton and Senator Obama both came back off the campaign trail to talk for the Ledbetter bill, because they were co-sponsors, and vote for it. Of course, we came up short. Harry Reid voted against us so he could start it back without having to go back through the House. That's the first time I learned that, so I never knew that before. But it was quite an awesome thing, and Senator Ted Kennedy said, you stand outside that door, and every senator that comes out that voted for it, you hug them, you shake their hand, you tell them how much you appreciate it. If they didn't vote, you want to know why, and next time you want them to vote, because it means a lot to the American family and the American worker.
That's awesome. Thank you.
So immediately after President Obama was sworn in, the Senate voted for your bill, 61 to 36, and the House of Representatives then followed up with a 250-177. We're not a partisan club, and we don't wish for you to give a partisan answer, but it is impossible to ignore that almost every Republican voted against it in Congress. So kind of how do you explain that?
That's when I was walking the halls getting support. And then when it got to the Senate, and after President Obama got elected, it sort of changed the landscape quite a bit.
So
And I would never have gone to the Democratic Convention in '08 and spoke, but they invited me, like they had run Reagan for John Kerry, to go independently and just tell my story, why we needed to elect him. But I was warned not to say too much in front of the reporter that I came off the stage and met, because she was very powerful. But I got so caught up with that audience, them hollering, and I could see tears, and the men was going, yes, yes, because they understood what it's like to try to support their families on less money than they should have, and what they're legally entitled to and have earned. But Senator McCain, who was running against Obama, he had just said, the women's problem, we did not have enough education or training. Now, if we get more education and training, we would get those dollars. But that wasn't true. He did not even come back and vote the first time. Because I thought about that medical doctor in New York, who she had